The dust of Virginia City clung to everything: the wooden storefronts, the mourning wreaths on every third door, the black dresses of women who had buried husbands 3 days prior. William Garrett stepped from the afternoon stage, his leather valise heavy in hand, and breathed air that tasted of ash and grief. He had come on railroad business. The Garrett Pacific Line needed new contracts with the Nevada mines, and Virginia City's recent disaster, 27 men killed when the eastern shaft collapsed, meant renegotiations. Opportunities, the usual dance of commerce and tragedy. William had done this for 20 years. He knew how to navigate catastrophe. The main street thrummed with activity despite the mourning. Volunteers hauled supplies. Women distributed bread from makeshift tables. Children sat silent in doorways, their eyes hollow with fresh loss. William adjusted his hat against the brutal June sun and started toward the mining office. Then he saw the priest. The man stood in the center of the relief effort, directing volunteers with quiet authority. His cassock was worn thin at the elbows, dusty from kneeling. He held a widow's hands while speaking to her, his head bowed to hear her words. Even at this distance, even after 2 years, William knew the shape of his son's shoulders. James. The recognition struck like a physical blow. William stopped walking. His valise slipped from his fingers, hitting the dirt with a muted thud. Around him, the chaos of relief work continued, people calling for water, for bandages, for someone to help with the orphaned Hennessy children, but William heard none of it. He stared at his son across 30 yards of devastation. James looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, William saw something flicker in his son's face: surprise, perhaps, or pain. Then James's expression settled into something softer. He offered a small nod, an acknowledgement, before returning his attention to the widow. Not even a greeting, not 5 words after 2 years of silence. William bent to retrieve his valise, his hands trembling, the heat pressed down like judgment. He wanted to cross the street, to demand acknowledgement, to ask why James could spare compassion for strangers, but not his own father. Instead, he turned toward the hotel. From his second-floor window an hour later, William watched the relief work continue. James moved through the crowd like a man who belonged there, comforting children, organizing food distribution, speaking with mine officials. His hands, William noticed, were scarred. When had that happened? When had his son's soft scholar's hands become marked by labor? The sun set in colors of blood and copper. Lamps were lit throughout the town. James worked on. 2 years of silence, William muttered to the empty room, and he can't spare 5 minutes for his own father. He poured himself whiskey from his flask and did not look away from the window. The memory came unbidden, triggered by the sight of James's worn cassock. San Francisco, 1889. William's office overlooking the Pacific, maps of proposed railroad extensions covering every wall. He had been excited that morning, genuinely excited, to show James the plans. Garrett Pacific Line would push into Colorado, connecting mining towns to the transcontinental route. It was brilliant. It was legacy. James had arrived promptly at 9 as requested. William remembered spreading the maps across his mahogany desk, pointing out routes and revenue projections. "We'll break ground next spring," William had said. "I want you leading the Colorado expansion. You've learned the business. Time to build something of your own." James had stood silent, hands clasped behind his back. "You're 23, William continued. "Your grandfather was already running crews at that age. We'll start you with go, father." James's voice was quiet. "I need to tell you something." William looked up from the maps. Something in his son's tone made his chest tighten. "I've been accepted to seminary," James said. "St. Mary's in Baltimore. I'm joining the Jesuits." The words made no sense. William stared at his son, waiting for the joke, the explanation, the real meaning behind these impossible sounds. "Seminary," he repeated. "Yes, father." "You're going to be a priest." "Yes." William's world tilted. "This is nonsense. You're tired. You've been working too hard." "I've been praying about this for 2 years." James's voice remained maddeningly calm. "I'm called to serve frontier mining communities, the people we've displaced, the workers injured building our railroads. They need spiritual care, education, advocacy." "Advocacy," William's voice rose. "I built this company for you. Everything I did, every mile of track, every negotiation, every risk was to give you something permanent. And you want to throw it away for poverty. I'm not throwing anything away, Father. I'm choosing to be a beggar. That's what priests are, educated beggars dependent on charity." William swept the maps onto the floor. "I gave you the finest education money could buy. Yale, business training, surveying experience. For what? So you could wear a black dress and recite Latin." James flinched at the cruelty but held his ground. "When I surveyed routes through Nevada last year, I saw the camps, families living in tents, children working underground at 8 years old, men injured with no compensation, no medical care, no recourse. Our railroad displaced their communities and offered nothing in return. We offered employment, progress, civilization. We offered exploitation disguised as opportunity." The words hung between them like gun smoke. William felt his face flush hot. "You're naive. You have no idea how the world actually works." "I know how our world works, Father. I've seen the ledgers. I know what we pay workers versus what we charge for freight. I know about the safety equipment we don't buy because dead miners are cheaper than protective measures. I've seen—" "Get out." James stopped talking. "If you choose this," William said, his voice shaking, "if you walk away from everything I've built, don't come back. I won't watch you destroy yourself with sanctimonious foolishness." James stood very still. Then he placed his hand over his father's on the desk, gentle. "Final. I love you, Father, but I must do this." He left. William stood alone in his office, surrounded by scattered maps of an empire his son would never inherit. That was 2 years ago. William had not spoken to James since. Now, in the Virginia City Hotel. William returned to the window. Rain clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark against the setting sun. James was still working below, now helping to construct temporary shelter for families who had lost their homes in the disaster's aftermath. "I'm not rejecting you, Father," James had said before leaving that final time. "I'm accepting something greater." William had dismissed it as religious delusion, but watching his son now competent, purposeful, surrounded by grateful people, he felt the first unwelcome stirring of uncertainty. William planned to complete his business and leave within 3 days. Virginia City was too small for comfortable avoidance, but he was practiced at maintaining distance. The plan lasted until noon the next day. The mine owners' meeting was held in the assay office, a dozen men in fine suits discussing compensation for the disaster. William sat in the back, observing. The owners argued that the shaft collapse was an act of God, unfortunate, but not their responsibility beyond burial costs. Then James entered. He wore his cassock and collar, his face sun-darkened and serious. He carried a ledger book. The mine owners fell silent. "Gentlemen," James said, "I've compiled information about the deceased miners and their families. I thought you should hear it." He opened the ledger. Thomas Brennan, age 31, wife Sarah, son Thomas Jr., age 12. Brennan worked your mines for 8 years. He leaves behind a family with no income and 3 months' rent owed. James turned a page. Robert Fletcher, age 47, injured working railroad construction in 1886. William went cold, suffered permanent back injury, received no compensation, worked your mines because he could no longer do physical labor, leaves behind a wife and 4 children. James continued through all 27 names, each one a person, not a statistic, each with family, history, dreams interrupted. When he finished, the room was silent except for the tick of the wall clock. "The families need compensation," James said, "not charity. Compensation for labor that built your wealth and then was destroyed in service to it." One mine owner cleared his throat. "Father, we sympathize, but business has risks. The men knew the dangers. Did they know you'd cut costs on shaft supports? Did they know the ventilation system was adequate for half the current workforce?" James's voice remained calm but iron hard. These weren't acceptable risks. These were preventable deaths caused by prioritizing profit over human life. Another owner shifted uncomfortably. "The economic realities of mining, the economic reality," James interrupted. is that you're mining silver worth millions while paying workers wages that keep their families one illness from starvation. That's not economic necessity. That's moral choice. William sat frozen. The language James used, business realities, acceptable risks, economic necessity. These were phrases William himself deployed. He had said exactly these things to railroad workers demanding better safety measures. The meeting dissolved into argument. James negotiated firmly but without anger, citing specific numbers and legal precedents. The mine owners agreed to nothing but promised further discussion. Afterward, William followed James outside. The temperature had climbed above 100 degrees. The air shimmered. "That was quite a performance," William said. James turned. Up close, his face showed exhaustion. "It wasn't performance. Father, it was necessary." "Necessary." William tasted the word. "You think shaming them into charity helps?" "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for justice." James studied his father's face. "How is your business in Virginia City? Railroad contracts? The usual?" "Of course." Something sad flickered in James's expression. "I should return to work. There are families who need—" "Your hands are scarred," William said abruptly. James looked down at his palms, calloused, marked with small burns and cuts. "I help with construction, the school we're building, relief shelters." He met his father's eyes. "Turns out manual labor teaches humility faster than scripture." He walked away before William could respond. That night, William sat in his hotel room with a bottle of whiskey. His own hands, spread before him on the table, were soft, unblemished, clean in a way that suddenly felt damning. He poured another drink and watched lamplight from James's church flicker against the dark. Sarah Brennan found William outside the assay office the next afternoon. She was younger than he expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled severely back and a black dress that had been dyed from something lighter. Her eyes were dry but ringed with sleeplessness. "Mr. Garrett," she said. He straightened. "Yes." "Sarah Brennan, my husband Thomas died in the collapse." She paused. "He worked for your railroad 5 years ago on the bridge construction near Carson City." William's throat tightened. "I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She didn't sound bitter. "I wanted to speak with you about your son, James." "Father James." She said the title with quiet respect. "He saved my boy's life." William blinked. "I don't understand." "My son Thomas Jr. is 12, after his father died, the first time. When Thomas Sr. left the railroad with his injury, Tommy got angry, started stealing, fighting, running with older boys who were heading toward violence." Sarah's voice remained steady, factual. "He was becoming someone I didn't recognize." The heat pressed down. William waited. "Father James started a school 6 months ago," Sarah continued. "Free for minors' children. He tracked Tommy down personally, talked to him for hours, offered education instead of judgment, gave him books, taught him mathematics, showed him that learning could be—" She searched for words. "A kind of power he didn't have to steal." "That was kind of him," William managed. "It was more than kindness. Mr. Garrett, it was seeing worth in an angry, grieving child when everyone else saw a future criminal." Sarah's gaze sharpened. "Your son gives people dignity. He sees us as fully human, not problems to be managed or expenses to be minimized." The criticism landed like a fist. William felt heat rise in his face. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm glad James helped your son. If there's anything I can do financially, I'd be happy to assist." He reached for his wallet. Sarah raised a hand. "Father James already helped us. Mr. Garrett, what we need isn't your charity. What we need is a system that values human dignity over profit. What we need is men like you, men with power and resources to see workers as people whose lives matter." William stood with his wallet half open. Stung. "You're angry." "Of course I'm angry. My husband is dead, but my anger at the system doesn't mean I'm ungrateful for Father James." "Both things are true." She softened slightly. "He talks about you sometimes." William's heart lurched. "What does he say? That he prays for you? That he hopes someday you'll understand why he made his choice?" Sarah adjusted her shawl. "I should go. Thank you for listening." She left him standing in the brutal afternoon heat. That evening, William walked past the converted warehouse that housed James's school. Through the open windows, he heard children's voices reciting mathematics tables. He moved closer. James stood at a makeshift chalkboard, teaching. 23 children sat on rough benches, their attention focused. William recognized Thomas Brennan, dark-haired, serious-faced, completely engaged. "If you're traveling by stars," James was saying, "you need to know basic celestial navigation. Who can tell me why the North Star matters?" A girl raised her hand. "It don't move." "Doesn't move," James corrected gently. "And yes, exactly. While other stars wheel across the sky, Polaris remains constant. That makes it trustworthy." "But why do we need to know this?" another child asked. "We ain't gonna be sailors." "Aren't going to be sailors," James said. "And you might not, but knowledge gives you choices. Maybe you'll survey railroad routes, maybe you'll guide wagon trains, maybe you'll navigate by stars just for the joy of understanding how the universe works." He leaned against the chalkboard. "Education means your future isn't decided by necessity. You get to choose." William watched his son teach for 20 minutes. When the lesson ended and children filed out, calling goodbyes, William remained in the shadows. "What have I actually built?" he thought. "That matters like this." He walked back to his hotel without answering himself. The clouds that had been gathering for 2 days finally broke. Rain began falling at sunset, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the dry earth. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in an hour. People emerged from buildings to stand in the cooling water, faces upturned. William found James outside the church, watching rain darken the dust. "Father," James said quietly, "I saw your school." William said. James turned. Water ran down his face. "What did you think?" "I think," William struggled with honesty, "I think you're building something real, something that matters. Thank you." They stood in silence. The rain intensified. "I don't understand how you can be satisfied with this," William said finally. "You could have had comfort, security, influence. Instead, you're teaching in a warehouse with secondhand books." "I have all of those things, Father, just not measured in money." James's voice held no triumph, only patience. "These children, they're learning to navigate by stars, to understand compound interest, to read history and see themselves as part of human continuity. That's influence. It's temporary. When you leave, it ends." "No." James shook his head. "I'm training 2 miners' wives to teach. We're establishing a foundation that continues. And even if it did end, the children who learned here will carry that knowledge forever. Education isn't a thing that disappears when the teacher leaves." William felt something crack inside his chest. "I thought I was building something permanent too. Rails across the frontier, transportation networks, an empire." "You were," James said gently, "but empires built on others' suffering don't endure." "Father, they collapse eventually under the weight of ignored debts, moral debts, not financial ones." The rain fell harder. William's fine suit was soaked through. "I spent 20 years, he said quietly, "building something I thought would matter. And my son chose poverty instead. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" "I chose service, not poverty. And yes, I know what it feels like to have someone misunderstand your life's purpose." James's eyes held sorrow. "You think I rejected you. I didn't. I rejected a system. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." James stepped closer. "I love you. Father, I always have, but I couldn't participate in building wealth on the backs of people we treated as expendable. I couldn't be part of that anymore." William had no answer. They stood in the rain until James excused himself to check on families whose homes were flooding. William walked back to his hotel alone, water streaming from his hat brim, something fundamental shifting beneath his certainty. The message came at dawn. Robert Fletcher was dying. James knocked on William's hotel door just after sunrise. "I'm going to sit with a dying man. I think you should come." "Why would I?" "Because he worked for you." James's face was grave. "Garrett Pacific Line, 1886, Carson City Bridge construction. Please, Father, just come." The rain had settled into steady drizzle. They walked through muddy streets to a shanty on the town's edge. Inside, Robert Fletcher lay on a rough bed, his breathing labored. His wife sat beside him, holding his hand. James knelt by the bed. Robert, I've brought someone. Fletcher's eyes, still sharp despite his body's failure, focused on William. Recognition dawned. Mr. Garrett, he whispered. William felt ice in his stomach. Mr. Fletcher? I'll give you privacy, James said, moving to sit with Mrs. Fletcher near the stove. William stood awkwardly. He hadn't been in a room like this in 20 years. Dirt floor, single lamp, poverty so complete it had its own smell. Sit, Fletcher said. William pulled up a rough stool. Fletcher's breathing rattled. The bridge, Fletcher said. I remember. Beautiful work. Spanned that canyon like a miracle. You helped build it, William said. I fell from it. Fletcher's smile was grim. 70 feet. Broke my back. 3 months in a tent with no doctor. Your foreman said I signed a waiver. No compensation. William knew this story. He'd heard versions of it hundreds of times. I'm sorry. Are you? Fletcher's gaze sharpened. Or are you just saying words from across the room? James was reading quietly to Mrs. Fletcher from Scripture. His voice provided gentle background. I don't know, William admitted. Fletcher nodded slightly. Honest, at least. He coughed, his body convulsing. When he could speak again, your son. He's different. He sees us as people. Not expenses, not risks, to be calculated. I'm beginning to understand that. Good. Fletcher closed his eyes. Maybe not too late for you to change what you build. William sat with Fletcher for another hour. James tended the dying man's wounds, bed sores, infection with careful gentleness. He read passages about rest and peace. He held Fletcher's hand when pain made the man cry out. Fletcher died just before noon, rain still falling softly outside. William helped James wash the body. It was the first time in his life he had touched a dead man. Fletcher's hands were calloused beyond anything William had imagined, layers of scar tissue from a lifetime of hard labor. I didn't know his name, William said quietly. When the accident happened, I saw a worker injured in a report. I signed off on the foreman's decision. I never asked his name. James said nothing, just continued washing Fletcher's feet. How many Robert Fletchers are there? William asked. How many men did I don't know, Father. James looked up. But you can start counting now, and you can start making different choices. They stayed until Mrs. Fletcher's sister arrived. Then William and James walked back through the rain, neither speaking. That night, William sat alone in his hotel room and wept for the first time in 30 years. The storm intensified after midnight thunder cracking like artillery, lightning illuminating Virginia City in stark white flashes. William stood at his window and watched nature rage. Inside his chest, something similar was happening. 20 years of certainty dissolved under Fletcher's dying words. William reviewed every decision, every contract, every time he had chosen profit over people and called it business necessity. The justifications that had seemed so reasonable now revealed themselves as moral cowardice. The railroad workers who died in construction accidents, acceptable losses for progress. The families displaced when routes cut through their settlements, inevitable cost of modernization. The workers injured and discarded personal responsibility. They'd signed waivers. Every excuse William had wielded now turned against him like a blade. Lightning flashed. In that brief illumination, William saw his reflection in the window, a man of 62 who had built magnificence on sand, who had mistaken wealth for worth, who had lost his son by refusing to see what his son saw with painful clarity. James hadn't rejected him. James had rejected a system William embodied. The rain pounded harder. William paced his small room, unable to sit, unable to rest. His empire, his beautiful, terrible empire, was built on ignored suffering. Every mile of track represented unpaid debts to men like Fletcher. Every dollar of profit carried the weight of families left destitute. And James had seen it. At 23, he'd seen what William at 62 had refused to acknowledge. At dawn, exhausted and hollow. William walked to the church. James was already there, kneeling in prayer. He looked up when William entered. I was wrong, William said. The words came from someplace deep and broken. About everything. The railroad, my life's work. What I thought mattered, all of it built on... His voice cracked. All of it built on sand. James stood slowly. Father, Your empire is real. William's face was wet with tears or rain. He didn't know. Mine was, it was exploitation dressed as progress, and I was too blind to see it. James crossed the space between them. You weren't evil. Father, you were blind. We all are, until something forces us to see. Fletcher forced me to see. His hands, his poverty, his death. William gripped his son's shoulders. I can't undo 20 years, but maybe God help me. Maybe I can do something different going forward. What do you want to do? I don't know. Tell me. You've thought about this. You've seen what's needed. William's voice shook. Use my resources for something that actually serves the people who built my wealth. Teach me how. James embraced his father, then the first physical contact in 2 years. They stood together in the empty church while rain hammered the roof, and something like redemption began to take shape. The town meeting was held on a Thursday evening, 1 week after the mining disaster. Every family affected, widows, orphans, injured miners crowded into the community hall. Mine owners sat in the front row, defensive and wary. William stood to present the Garrett Workers' Welfare Foundation. My name is William Garrett, he began. Most of you know me as the railroad man. Some of you worked for me. Some of you were injured working for me. He paused. Some of you died. The room went silent. I built an empire by ignoring the people who built it for me. William continued. I measured success in miles of track and profit margins. I never counted the cost in human suffering. Robert Fletcher made me count. He outlined the foundation comprehensive injury compensation for all past and current railroad workers, education funding for workers' children, widow pensions, workplace safety standards, medical care access. I'm committing $200,000 initially, William said. Not charity restitution. This is paying debts I should have paid 20 years ago. A miner stood. Pretty words. Mr. Garrett, but words are cheap. How do we know this isn't temporary? How do we know you won't just, you don't? William interrupted. You can't know. I'm asking you to judge me by sustained action, not immediate promises. He met the man's eyes. I've spent 20 years earning your suspicion. It'll take longer than a week to earn your trust. Sarah Brennan raised her hand. What changed your mind? William looked at James, standing quietly in the back. My son taught me to see what I'd been blind to, and Robert Fletcher, a man I injured and abandoned, showed me the cost of that blindness. The meeting continued for 2 hours. Questions were skeptical but genuine. The mine owners initially resisted, then grudgingly agreed to match William's contribution for disaster victims. Afterward, James joined his father outside. The rain had finally stopped. Stars were visible for the first time in days. You did well, James said. I said true things. Whether I can sustain them remains to be seen. William looked at his son. Will you help me? I don't trust myself to do this alone. I'll revert to old habits without accountability. Of course I'll help. They walked together through muddy streets, discussing logistics, arguing over details, planning how to expand the foundation's reach to other railroad towns. It felt, William thought, like the collaboration he'd once imagined, but better, because it was built on shared values rather than inherited empire. 6 months later, William stood at the dedication of the new school building. 93 children attended, now miners' kids, railroad workers' kids, all given education and possibility. His hands were scarred, not like James's, not as deeply marked but calloused from 6 months of working alongside construction crews, insisting on safety protocols, learning what manual labor actually felt like. The soft, clean hands of a man who built empires from an office had been replaced by hands that knew the weight of timber, the bite of splinters. Sarah Brennan's son Thomas read a speech thanking the foundation. His voice was clear, confident, the voice of a young man with a future he could choose. William addressed the crowd afterward. My son taught me that true legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who you lift up, James added, standing beside him. And my father taught me that transformation is always possible, that seeing clearly, however late, is better than remaining blind. The school was simple but sturdy, good timber, proper ventilation, a real stove for winter. Inside, books lined shelves, maps covered walls, a chalkboard held tomorrow's lessons. William had paid for all of it, but more importantly, he'd worked on it, measuring lumber, mixing mortar, raising beams alongside crews he now knew by name. Men who had worked his railroad and borne its costs, men he was learning to see as fully human. Afterward, he and James walked the perimeter of the new building, checking final details. "Do you ever regret it?" William asked, choosing the seminary over the railroad. "Never," James said without hesitation. "Do you regret your choice?" "Every day," William admitted, "until I chose differently." They stood together in the autumn sunlight, looking at the school, at children playing in the yard, at teachers preparing lessons, at the infrastructure of human dignity taking shape. "I can't undo 20 years, William said quietly. "Fletcher is still dead. The miners I injured can't be uninjured. The families I displaced can't be undisplaced." "No," James agreed. "But you can spend your remaining years making restitution, building what should have been built alongside the railroad, creating systems that value people." William extended his hand. James took it. Both their hands were scarred now, marked by work that mattered, by service that built rather than extracted. "Partners?" William asked. "Partners," James confirmed. They gripped each other's hands, father and son, empire builders of different kinds, finally aligned in purpose. The school bell rang, calling children to afternoon lessons. Somewhere in Virginia City, a widow received her first pension payment in a mining camp 200 miles east. Workers organized to demand safety equipment, citing the Garrett Foundation's standards. The empire William once measured in miles of track was transforming. Now it was measured in transformed lives, in children who could choose their futures, in workers treated with dignity, in systems slowly bending toward justice. It wasn't redemption, not complete, not pure. The past remained, with all its casualties and moral failures. But it was transformation. It was choosing differently. It was building something that actually endured. As they walked back toward town, William looked at his scarred hands and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like he might deserve to call James his son.